the ocean, with wind and rain and thunder and lightning and waves. A hurricane roared and raged through the night, and in the middle of the chaos, a cargo ship was sinking down, down, down to the ocean floor. The ship left hundreds of crates floating on the surface, but as the hurricane thrashed and swirled and knocked them around, the crates also began sinking into the depths. One after another, they were swallowed up by the waves until only 5 crates remained. By morning, the hurricane was gone. There were no clouds, no ships, no land in sight. There was only calm water and clear skies, and those 5 crates lazily bobbing along an ocean current. Days passed, and then a smudge of green appeared on the horizon. As the crates drifted closer, the soft green shape slowly sharpened into the hard edges of a wild, rocky island. The first crate rode to shore on a tumbling, rumbling wave and then crashed against the rocks with such force that the whole thing burst apart. Now, reader, what I haven't mentioned is that tightly packed inside each crate was a brand new robot. The cargo ship had been transporting hundreds of them before it was swept up in the storm. Now, only 5 robots were left. Actually, only 4 were left, because when that first crate crashed against the rocks, the robot inside shattered to pieces. The same thing happened to the next crate. It crashed against the rocks and robot parts flew everywhere. Then it happened to the next crate, and the next. Robot limbs and torsos were flung onto ledges. A robot head splashed into a tide pool. A robot foot skittered into the waves. And then came the last crate. It followed the same path as the others, but instead of crashing against the rocks, it slashed against the remains of the first 4 crates. Soon, more waves were heaving it up out of the water. It soared through the air, spinning and glistening until it slammed down onto a tall shelf of rock. The crate was cracked and crumpled, but the robot inside was safe. So as Lori said, my name is Katie. And the very first thing that I have to say to you is that I love children's books. I'm here today to talk to you guys about reading with your kids, but I wanted to start by saying that I believe that children's books are stories, they're some of the best stories in the world. And that no matter how old you are, a good kids book is worth reading for your own sake as well. The book that I was just reading from is called The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. Technically, it was written for kids aged to 12, but I find that the writing and the characters, it's about a robot who ends up on this island and meets all these different animal friends. It's something that's amazing to read on your own as well. You are never too old to read a good book, and there is no age where being read aloud to is not beneficial, and I would say fun as well. So as Lori mentioned, I'm a library technician. I also went to university to study children's literature, and I worked for years at Indigo in the kids section. So I feel like as much as I can be an expert on these things, I sometimes feel like I'm not and like a little bit of a fraud, but then I have moments where I think, you know what, I know a couple things. So I hope that towards the end, we're gonna have a time to share some recommendations. And if you have questions or want ideas for recommendations, I would love to sort of sit and go through those with you as well, but also have some grace for me because there are thousands of kids books and I don't know them all yet. So I am going to leave a space for questions at the end. If there's something that comes up in the chat, Lori, maybe that you want to just draw my attention to, I'll have the slides going, so feel free to interrupt at any time. And if I can sort of expand on what I'm saying, I will, but there will also be that time at the end as well. So I'm going to just share the slide here. Also, techie things are not my skills, so bear with me on this. I think it should be okay. But okay, so today we're going to be talking about reading with your kids and why it matters. We're just going to go over a couple things. Why does it matter if I read with my kids? How do we create a reading habit? Where do I find good books? And what should we read? So that first question, and I'm a little intimidated now to hear that Charmaine works in neuroscience because that is not my background. So if I say anything that sounds incorrect or that you could expand on, feel free to jump in. So one of the really amazing things about reading out loud with your kids is that it strengthens the intimacy between you. There's something about reading that draws people closer together. Something literally physically is happening. You know, your kids are maybe on your lap while you're reading together, and there are chemicals that are released in your brain when that happens. And there have been studies that show that helps decrease stress and anxiety. It also creates that bond between parent and child, and that's a really important thing to have those times. It also creates, I read a book that called it Invisible Threads Between You, and I thought that was such a cool way of thinking about it. Because when you're reading stories together, you're developing mutual interest. If you're reading a story, let's say Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh now is a mutual friend that you and your kids share. And so when you're going through your day, you can refer to that, and that's something that you guys have in common, or inside jokes that might come out of it. And so it's a really cool way to build relationship with your kids, again, from early days to when they're older as well. It's also a good way for you to share your interests. So if you love soccer and are reading books about soccer, it's likely that your kids are going to start to develop an interest in that too. your voice is also really important in your child's development. And one thing that I think is really intriguing is that there's also been some studies, and some people really think that you can even be reading to your kid before they're born. That as you're pregnant, that they're hearing your voice, that sound and sort of that comfort and the tone of your voice is something that sticks with them. Newborns have been shown to react to hearing their mother's voice. Their brain activity spikes, their stress goes down. And so if you're reading to your kid, even if they're too young to understand the words, doesn't matter what the content is. You could be reading Twilight, I'm just saying. It doesn't matter. It's what they're hearing. It's the sound of your voice. If they're sitting on your chest, it's the feeling of hearing your voice sort of rumbling through their back. There is so much science that talks about the value of that in terms of developing that connection between you. Reading together with your kids, specifically kids age 0 to 3, it also emphasizes that it gives you an opportunity to show them attention, to spend time together. It's a way to develop language. It's a way for them to engage with their mind and their brain development. It's also a really good way to learn more when you're reading together, and we're going to go through this a little bit later. It's not just about what you're reading. You can pause, you can ask questions, you can sit with things for a while. And so sometimes things come up as you're reading that wouldn't have come up in normal conversation. And so it's different than watching a video or listening to an audiobook, because you can engage together. You can take that time to listen to what their questions might be. Maybe something comes up in your mind as you're reading. Picture books especially are really good for that, just because there are often things that the kids might point to or that you might draw their attention to that you wouldn't have if there was a book that didn't have any art or illustrations. And again, as you're reading, your tone of voice, the way that you read something, how you pronounce it, you're teaching your kids grammar, you're teaching them language. And even if they're very, very young, you're setting up that foundation for them to learn as they continue to get older, which is pretty cool. This now is my area of not expertise. It helps foster brain development. So again, Charmaine, if you want to throw anything in here, you're welcome to. So the child's brain develops massively between the ages of 0 to 5, and 3 to 5 are also really formative years. And there's a lot of research that shows that when you listen to stories while looking at pictures, your brain is being stimulated in a way that is totally different than when you're just hearing the words aloud or watching a video or something like that. So you're helping to build foundations for early language and speech. Some studies have actually shown that preschoolers who have consistent reading at home time, they actually have a greater capacity to process more of what they're hearing and at faster speeds. So what that means is that they're picking up more language, but they're also using their imaginations in bigger ways and more layers to their day than they would if they didn't have that habit of reading. Another thing I thought was really interesting is that kids in kindergarten who have regular bedtime reading routines could be as many as 12 to 14 months ahead of children their age who don't have regular reading in terms of their language and reading skills. Kids pick up millions of words in a day, in a week, in a year, depending on their context. And reading together is a really massive way to increase the number of words that your kids are interacting with, and more so that they're actually taking in. One other thing I thought was really interesting is that there are links between language and math skills, which I find intriguing because I feel like they are two wholly separate areas. But there have been a lot of studies that show that when you are developing that understanding of language and being able to engage with those things, it actually helps you engage with other areas of life as well. So it's not just about reading, it's not just about stories. It has so much, many broader applications as well. Lastly, reading together really sets your kids up for success. So this next thing I want to share, it seems unbelievable, but the difference between children who get bedtime stories and those who don't, the difference in their life chances, it's bigger than the difference of people who go to a private elite school and those who don't. So again, you could send your kid to a private school and it wouldn't have the same advantages as reading regularly with your kids at bedtime, which I just think is an amazing thing. It also is so much more open. There's, that's a really small pocket of our population that can go down that route, but reading together is something that we can all do. And it sets your kids up for success in a really beautiful way. It develops empathy, the ability to understand people who are different, people who have different life experiences, just through reading. Children also learn to regulate their attention, and language gives them the ability to deal with hard emotions. And we know that kids feel a lot of things in their very small bodies, and being able to share them and use the language and words to express them is huge. And again, reading all contributes to that. And specifically reading aloud and what that develops in your child's life. So the main focus of our talk today is going to be about how you create reading habits, and how what that looks like kind of in your day-to-day life. And honestly, the simplest thing, do what you can, start small, be consistent. If you only have 5 or 10 minutes a day to sit and read together, that's amazing. That's 5 or 10 minutes a day that they mightn't have been reading before. Experts do recommend being consistent, and bedtime tends to be the easiest, I think, because you're winding down for the day. It's a good way to get kids to sort of quiet down as well before sleep. So having that bedtime routine is a really good spot to do it. That being said, I also really recommend reading any time of day. There's no such thing as reading too much. I say this, my parents might have disagreed when I was young, staying up a little too late reading. But yeah, you can be reading any time of the day. And another, a really good helpful tool for that is to have books around. It's not just about having that one book at bedtime. It's about having books in your kids' play area so that as they're going through, even if they can't read yet, having that tactile experience of touching and playing and looking at pictures is important for their development as well. So having books in your space is a really helpful thing. We are going to talk a little bit later as well of where you can get books from, different resources that you can have as well. Another really important thing is to remove distractions, having the TV off or radio off. I really recommend putting your phone away for these story times or even turning it off, just so that in that time together when you're reading, it's sacred. It's this space, it's this ritual that you develop and you build with your kids. So they know that when you're reading together, you're with them reading together and you're not feeling like you have to rush off and go and do, to answer a text or anything like that. It's a really important thing to demonstrate that you're paying attention. And it's also teaching kids how to pay attention and how to focus in reading as well. Another thing, and I realize this might be a harder one, is reading by example. So one of the key things for kids in reading is seeing other people reading. So it might be, again, it might be something that you have to start small, do what you can. Like I know it's not always easy to find time in your day to read. And it doesn't just have to be books, reading a magazine or, sitting and reading a label on a product together at the table, even just building in those habits as a whole family so that they know that reading is something that is valued for everybody. It's for grownups too. It's not just for kids. And I would say one of the most helpful things with that is to have regular library visits. Slight plug, the Toronto Public Library System is, I think, one of the best public libraries in the English speaking world. It's really phenomenal how many resources you have. We'll go into that a little bit later. There's so much available to you guys through the library. They've also, they're really working to make things more accessible. They have a pretty high number of limits, or like how many books you can take out at a time. You're not limited to 5 books. You can take out quite a few. So I would say spend as much time at your library as you can. This is maybe a silly question. How many of you have seen Beauty and the Beast, either the animated version or the live action? Okay, the scene when she walks into that library and the Beast gives it to her, I drool every time. The idea of someone giving you that many books is almost overwhelming. And that's kind of what libraries are. It is this inheritance that we all have, that your kids have. These are books that we can read. These are books that we are allowed to go in and to borrow again if we find ones that we love. And that is also a really powerful thing to teach your kids, that all of those books on the shelves are something that they get access to. They belong to them in a different way. And that is, I think that kind of ownership is also a really important part of teaching a love of reading and teaching kids to engage with books. The last thing I would say is that reading regularly together is hard. It takes commitment. It's not something that you're going to want to do every day. There will be times when you're exhausted and you would really rather not do it. And I would say, one, that's fine. Like, don't ever beat yourself up for the days when you can't do it, because we're human and that happens. But I also just want to say that it's worth it. It's one of those hard things that is totally worth it in the long run. And again, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be 5 minutes of reading. It can be one short story every day. But as we've talked about, the benefits of it are just so significant in your child's development and in their life. So when we're talking about reading with your kids, here are a couple things that you can do. It's not just a matter of reading what you see on the page, zipping through the pages and closing the book and you're done. It's about engaging with what you're reading. And I'm sure any of you who have read with your kids before know, sometimes you don't read in order. Sometimes you might skip ahead a few pages. Sometimes your kids might grab the pages and go back to the cover again. And I just want to say, first and foremost, that is okay. I love order. I love things to be done a certain way. And so that was a big learning curve for me when I started reading with kids. It was not feeling like we had to read in order. We couldn't skip pages. I still am learning it sometimes. But just to remember that reading is something that you're sharing and doing together, and following your kids, like following, if they're really intrigued by a certain page, take time to sit with it. Ask them what it is that they like about it. Point to different things on the page. Depending how old they are, you can ask questions like, where's the dog? Or can you show me where the apple is? As they get older, you can ask more open-ended questions. What do you think about that? or I wonder why. So asking questions, encouraging your kids to ask questions, being okay if you don't know the answers as well. Sometimes they might ask questions about things that you don't know the answer to. And that can be a really good opportunity to say things like, I don't know, why do you think? Pointing things out on the page and talking about what you like in the story. So I'm a big believer that the things you're excited about, your kids are going to get excited about. If there is a book that you don't enjoy reading, and it's not your child's favorite, because sometimes that happens where they pick one that they just love and you'd really rather not read it for the 400th time today. That does happen sometimes. But reading things that you find interesting, reading things that you find you enjoy the illustrations and talking about them is teaching your kids how to value certain kinds of stories and certain kind of books. So you get to participate too. You don't just pick the books for your kids and, feel like you just have to read them because they're there. Choose ones that you enjoy. Choose books that you also appreciate and can talk about together. Maybe you like the way that a certain phrase sounds, or you like a certain kind of art style. Share that with your kids. Talk about why you like them. So the question of where do you find good books? As I said, Toronto Public Library has so many different resources. They have a lot of electronic resources as well. They have ebooks that you can get. They have loads of other resources outside of books as well. They have programs. I'm not sure with COVID how restricted they are at the moment, but they have a lot of programming for parents. All of it is free. They often will have March break events and things, summer camps. Usually in the summertime, there's a whole reading project that they do with kids across the city. You can get free passes from the library to art galleries and museums. There's so much that's available there. If you haven't already, I really encourage you to go to a local branch and just ask them what kind of services they have. Another spot that you can find books is little free libraries. So I don't know, have you guys ever been out walking and seen, they kind of look like big birdhouses almost filled with books? Has anyone ever seen those before? So there are these things called little free libraries, and I've put a link, and I'm going to ask Lori to send these slides around after so you'll be able to access it. You can actually find a map to all the different little free libraries in your area. And I did check, and you guys are in Scarborough, I think, right? So in the East End. There are a lot out there, and they are what they sound like. They're free. You can go and take books, and they get changed all the time because people are constantly donating books there. I have found some phenomenal treasures in those little free libraries. I heartily recommend checking them out anytime you see them. And you can keep them. I've always been a bit confused by that because they call it a library, but it's, if you find a book you like, you can keep it. You don't have to return it. Another amazing resource is the Children's Book Bank. It's located, I don't know if it's going to open to the screen or not. Okay, my computer is just taking a moment. So the Children's Book Bank is located sort of downtownish, closer to the East End. And it is this beautiful old building filled with books, and it looks like a bookstore, but it's all free. So you can actually partner with them. They'll often do like field trips with schools and things like that, but you can actually make an appointment to come in, and their whole mission is to make good books available to people who might not be able to get them otherwise. And they are picky about the kind of books that they put on their shelves. So essentially everything that you get there is going to be good. So I'll leave that link there. It's something that you guys can take a look at and explore a little bit more, but it's definitely worth checking out. Other places you can find books, browsing your bookstore shelves, Indigo, local bookstores, thrift stores often have a lot of books, yard sales, used bookstores. Once Upon a Child, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with that one. They often have quite a few shelves of books there as well. And also libraries often will have a cart somewhere near the checkout of books that they've withdrawn, and they're selling usually. They don't always have kids' books, but sometimes they do. So they're worth checking out as well. So there's lots of places that you can get books, ones that you can borrow, ones that you can get for free. Also just trading with friends. There is value in repetition with reading with your kids. There's also value in introducing new books into their diet. So if you wanted to maybe trade 3 books with a friend so that each of your kids get 3 new books for that week, that's something that you could consider doing as well. Okay. And some good places to find recommendations as well. I am afraid that my computer might have frozen. Lori, do you mind unmuting yourself and just letting me know if you can still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Were you frozen and now you're not?
I think it's okay. Yeah, just let me know. Send me a text if I suddenly drop off.
Okay. All looks good from our end.
Okay,
so I'm not sure what you're experiencing, but
okay. So a couple places that are good spots to look for recommendations. As I said, there are thousands of amazing books for kids out there. There are also lots of books that aren't as good. And so there's a lot of value in asking people or finding resources to get ideas of recommendations. I would say your number one resource is going to be staff at a local library or bookstore. If you go and ask them, maybe your kids really like books about animals and you want some recommendations, they're going to have some ideas for you. Often on the library website, like Toronto Public Library has a whole blog called Buzz About Books. And they'll often put up a bunch of lists there to go through to introduce you to different kind of categories of books as well. There's a website called Book Riot. They'll often.
Okay, now we've lost her. Katie, can you hear me? Can anyone else, is she frozen for you too? Or is that me?
No, she's frozen for me.
Okay.
And me too.
Okay. It's always funny what picture gets frozen. I'm presuming I'll just text her. All as well. I don't even know if I have her email. What do you think? Oh, she's gone. So it looks like she'll come back in. And know what? Nadia was interested. She was engaged, but has left. I don't know. Maybe I could text Nadia and make sure everything's okay.
Oh, I think I've got her phone number.
Okay.
Right. I think I texted her. So let me try.
Okay. Oh, technology, eh? Hey, Paula? We love it and hate it.
For sure.
I'll be looking forward to the days when we can be in person.
That's true. Yeah.
It's a bit more effort to get in person, but it's so nice to be together and impactful, and then technology doesn't kill us. So
yeah, actually I was like really
Okay, so the other one was the Children's Book Bank, which is, like I said, a really good resource to go and get books in the city, and I will include the link for that. Local bookshops, thrift stores, yard sales, used bookstores, library book carts. Did it cut off the part where we were talking about like spots to look for resources, like Goodreads? Did you hear that part?
Oh, yeah. You
Okay.
shared about a website, a couple websites to get recommendations.
Perfect. Okay, so let's move on now about what to read. Actually, I'm not going to do the screen share quite yet. So I have a little bit of a soapbox moment that I want to do here about reading for boys or for girls. So when I worked at Indigo, this is something that came up quite a lot, is that people would be concerned that a certain book maybe wouldn't be attractive to boys or girls, depending on what the content was. And the reality is that the publishing world really does market certain books towards girls and certain books towards boys. But I personally really believe that, the idea that a boy can't enjoy a book about princesses, or that a girl isn't interested in a story about trucks or pirates, isn't something that we are born with. That's something that we learn. It's something that we teach our kids. There are so many excellent books out there that kids never read because their parents or teachers or whoever's choosing their books for them just assume that they wouldn't be interested in. So I really want to challenge you, anytime that you think to yourself, oh, this is a book not for my child, to really pause and question why you're thinking that. And it's okay. It doesn't mean that every book is one that your kid is going to enjoy, but just not to let that assumption stop you from picking a book that otherwise might have been good. A good book is a good book. And also, it's a really good way to teach empathy, even if it's, if it's not a book about, if you have a girl and it's not a book about girls, or if it's a book about kids from a different culture or things that you're not normally interested in, it's still really valuable to read it because it's a way to understand the world, a way to understand other perspectives. So I really just recommend thinking about that when you're choosing your books. The other thing is that there's a lot of research, and I worked at a boys' school in their library for a while. There's a lot of research that talks about how boys kind of fall away from reading as they get older. Sort of middle school is when they're often the most excited about it. And then when they hit high school, it suddenly becomes, whether it's a popularity thing or not, something that they're just less interested in. So if you have boys, be prepared for that. And one way to be prepared for that is just to continue to encourage reading. And, even as they get older, reading with your kids, even when they're able to read by themselves, keep it up. Still make that something that you do together so that you're emphasizing reading as a valuable thing. If at all possible, having examples of other men or boys who are reading in their lives is good. I know there are quite a few different videos you can find online of actors and celebrities reading. So maybe ones who are role models to them, just to encourage them that is something that is valuable, not just for girls as they get older. I'm just going to speed ahead and do a screen share again. So there are different kinds of books that you can get. Again, I really do recommend for young kids, especially physical books. There is more value in that than reading something on a tablet or online. So if you are able to have a hands-on book, it is always a better option. But any kind of reading is good. If it's happening online, that's fine too. But if you have a choice, I would say lean more towards physical books, because that tactile experience, being able to sort of flip through the pages, is a really good part of the reading experience as well. The other thing, age appropriate content. Ultimately, it's up to you as the parent what your kids are going to be reading at a young age. And I want to encourage you to find the balance between things you're comfortable with them reading, but also remembering that reading is a safe way to expand your child's world. And so in that context, having stories with things that are a little bit scary or a little bit new can be okay, especially if you're reading with them and can stop and slow down and talk about things and answer questions. So don't feel like because something is maybe a little bit beyond what you would normally talk about, that it's not worth exploring, but also recognizing that you need to be comfortable with the things that you're reading with your kid. So there's a bit of a balance there.
Hi, Katie. I'm
yeah.
just going to interrupt you. We're welcoming Sam into the group, and I just wanted to alert you to that. Even you can still wrap. Hi, Sam, if you can hear me. Hi. How are you, Samantha? No. Pause. Let me go.
Okay, so the other things I would recommend are, like I said before, don't stop reading with your kids just because they're old enough to read on their own. Often a child's receptive vocabulary, that means words that they can understand, is ahead of what they actually can speak and express. So they can often appreciate books that are beyond what they could necessarily speak themselves. And those are the kind of books that you probably still want to be reading together. So again, that you can be talking about things that maybe are less familiar to them, or if they have questions. I am going to jump ahead. There are a couple things here. Really quick, it's worth rereading books. Good practice to have. And sorry, I'm just going to go back. And when you are trying to identify a good book, we went through a couple of the lists there. One other thing I would say, look for authors that you like, look for illustrators that you like, and see if they've written other things. That's a really good way to look into different books. Okay, quickly, I'm just going to jump into the different kind of books that you can be reading with your kids. So for infants, hands-on books like cloth books or bath books, ones that have textures, touch and feel. There's this one line called Indestructibles, and they are what they sound like. You can chew on them, you can pull on them, you can tear them, and they don't fall apart. And the illustrations are often really beautiful. Board books, there's counting books, alphabet, colors, animals, and these are all that harder card, which is good for that younger age. High contrast books like this one on the left here are somewhat newer in the world of children's books, but they use that idea that babies are able to see sort of different colors than we're normally able to. And it's just a good way to be working their minds a little bit. So you'll see a couple of those in your bookstores or libraries now. Lift the Flap books, nursery rhyme books. These are all good options for infants here. There's also a lot of books that don't necessarily have stories to them, but they're almost like poetry. And a lot of the times they're really affirming books that just speak to your child, that they are valued, that they're loved, that they're safe. There's a lot of good examples of that out there. And again, these will be in the list at the end. And then stories, books that are just stories. Again, even if your kid can't speak yet, even if they're still learning, there's still value in reading books that are actually stories because you're teaching them language, you're teaching them a whole lot of things that we talked about at the beginning as well. There are also picture books for ages roughly 3 to 5. There's a lot of really cool historical and biographical books that you can get access to now. The series on the left, Little People, Big Dreams, I won't even begin to go through them, but there's so many different historical figures that you can learn about and really cool illustrations as well. Again, books that have stories to them. And we're seeing a lot more representation now as well. You can find a lot of books by a lot of authors from different backgrounds and cultures. And again, you can find those lists on all those places we talked about before. A lot of silly books. This one here, The Book with No Pictures, is one I would definitely recommend you all check out. It is what it says. There are no pictures. It just makes you, the reader, say a lot of very silly things, and it is always a hit with kids.
And that's the guy from The Office, right?
It is, yeah, which is so weird, but yes. And then for early readers, you can get leveled reading books like this that often repeat certain sounds or letters as kids are starting to get comfortable reading on their own. Books that are easier to read. This one here, the Elephant and Piggy books are always a hit. They're kind of like a comic style. I find them hilarious. I own a couple and I read them because they're funny. Like they're good for kids. They're good for adults. Lots of series for kids who are age 5 to 8 as well. Again, we won't go into them all right now, but there's a lot of really good content available for young kids, graphic novels and chapter books alike. And then nonfiction too. Again, I won't go into them, but there's a lot of resources available. Okay, I kind of flew through that last bit there. And I'll show you really quick. We do have a list of different books here that I'm going to send to Lori that she can circulate for you.
Yeah.